Hey everyone, Ray Cole here. Welcome back to Legendary Audio. You know, I've reviewed a ton of speakers over the years, from insane high-end beasts that cost a fortune to ones that just hit you right in the chest and refuse to let go. But there's one brand that no other company has ever been able to copy. It all started in a beat-up old tin shed behind a dry cleaner in a tiny forgotten town most people have never heard of. A stubborn genius who wore a bright yellow bullshit button like a badge of honor and created something that's still breathing nearly 80 years later. And then there was one final promise that simply refused to die. Today, I'm pulling back the curtain on the real truth about Klipsch, why they're completely impossible to replicate, and why, once you sit in front of them and really listen, they stay with you for the rest of your life. If you love real audio stories, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss this one. Paul W. Klipsch, the maverick genius. All right, guys, let's kick this off, right? Everything started with a tough, stubborn kid named Paul Wilbur Klipsch, born in 1,904 inches, Elkhart, Indiana. He lost his father when he was just 12 years old. Most boys would have been crushed by that. Paul, he took that pain and turned it into rocket fuel. By the time he hit 15 in 1919, this kid had already built his own radio receiver a full year before the first commercial radio station even existed. Picture that while other teenagers were out chasing trouble, young Paul was soldering wires together by lamplight, pulling music and voices out of thin air like some kind of mad scientist. That single moment tells you everything you need to know about the man he was going to become. He never waited for the world to hand him anything. He built it himself. He went on to study engineering, worked for heavy hitters like General Electric and RCA, and even traveled down to Chile to work on electric locomotives. But no matter where life took him, his obsession with sound followed like a shadow. He was constantly messing with horn speakers, trying to solve the mystery of why some designs could make music feel so damn powerful and alive. Then one day, a buddy casually threw out a line that would change audio forever: speakers sound better in a corner. Most people would have laughed and forgotten it by dinner. Not Paul. That sentence dug into his brain and refused to let go. Fast forward to World War II, Paul ends up stationed at the Southwest Proving Grounds in the quiet little town of Hope, Arkansas. By day, he's out in the blazing heat testing massive 105 millimeters howitzers, the ground shaking like thunder, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder. But when the sun went down, he'd disappear into a beat-up old tin shed behind a dry cleaner and start building something far more important: the future of how humans experience music. Here's the kind of guy Paul was when plywood became almost impossible to get during the war. He needed it for his first high-frequency horn, so he called up a friend in New York, Sherman Fairchild, who secretly shipped him the wood. That's pure, no bullshit determination. Paul wasn't just smart. He was a full-blown character. He wore a bright yellow bullshit button on his chest like a medal, ready to call out any fake claims in the audio world. The man lived loud, honest, and completely on his own terms, and that wildfire he carried from a young age. It was about to spark one of the greatest stories in audio history. Here's a story I love. Plywood was rationed like crazy during the war, almost impossible to get. Paul needed it bad for his first high-frequency horn. So he called up a friend, Sherman Fairchild, and the guy secretly shipped him the wood. That's the kind of relentless, no bullshit determination Paul had. And let me tell you, the man was a character. He wore a bright yellow bullshit button on his chest like a damn medal, ready to call out any phony audio claims on the spot. He rocked 4 watches at once, one for every U, S, time zone, ons. He stripped down in his office, cranked the heat up, and tore a calculator apart just to prove a point. Hell, he even flew his plane like a madman, pushing it to the edge just to understand physics better. Paul Klipsch didn't just design speakers. He attacked life with the same raw energy he brought to audio. No compromises, no fake stuff. Just pure, stubborn passion. That's the kind of man who turned a rusty shed in the middle of nowhere into the birthplace of something that's still standing strong almost 80 years later. But how did that wild dream in a tin shed actually become a legend? Stick around and hit subscribe. Because we're just getting started. Hope, Arkansas, the heart of the legacy. And that dream didn't stay in the shed for long. Let me take you to the place where it all happened, a little town called Hope, Arkansas. This is where the heart of Klipsch still beats today. This little town most folks have never heard of is where the whole Klipsch story really took root. Back in 1945, Paul Klipsch was working out of a beat-up tin shed behind a dry cleaner, nothing fancy, just a rusty roof, concrete floor, and a whole lot of determination. That's where the very first Klipschorn prototypes came to life. Fast forward almost 80 years later, and guess what? They're still building those speakers right there in Hope. The factory never left. While other companies chased cheaper labor overseas, Klipsch stayed put. There's something powerful about that kind of loyalty to a place. I love hearing from the people who actually work there. These aren't just employees clocking in and out. We're talking guys who've been with the company for decades. Terry Willis has been there 47 years. Mike Beasley's at 36 years. Ron Rose started back in 1985. Marching Hernandez, Jack Paxton, Jesse Lowry. Some of these men have given the better part of their lives to building these speakers. That kind of dedication is rare as hell in any industry, especially audio. And here's the cool part. These speakers are still proudly made in America. The woofers, like the famous K33 that power the Cornwall and Klipschorn, made in Eminence, Kentucky. The grills on the Forte and Heresy done in Chicago. The wood for the big boys like La Scala and Klipschorn comes from California, while the Heresy and Forte cabinets use walnut from Indiana. Real American craftsmanship. Piece by piece. One story that always gets me is from a fan who won a raffle back in 1987 for a brand new pair of Heresy 2 speakers. He drove all the way to Hope to pick them up. Paul Klipsch himself signed the back of one of the speakers and personally gave the guy a tour of the plant. That man is now in his late 50s, and he's still rocking those same Heresy 2s in his house today. That's not just a speaker. That's a piece of history you can actually listen to. There's real soul in that town. You feel it when you hear the stories. Hope, Arkansas isn't just a dot on the map. It's the beating heart of everything Klipsch stands for. The heritage line, the DNA of Klipsch. But what exactly came out of that heart? Let's talk about the speakers that built the legend, the mighty Heritage series. These aren't just products. They're the DNA. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Now let's talk about the real crown jewels, the Heritage series. It all started back in 1946 with the Klipschorn, Paul's first big creation, and nearly 80 years later, it's still being built today. That alone puts it in a league of its own. While most speakers from that era are long gone or sitting in museums as relics, the Klipschorn is still out here making music in people's homes. It uses the walls of your room as part of the design, giving it this massive, room-filling bass that's hard to match even with today's big subwoofers. From there, Paul kept evolving the idea. In 1957, he introduced the Heresy. It was originally meant to be a humble center speaker sitting between a pair of Klipschorns, but people fell in love with how musical and lively it sounded on its own. Soon enough, folks were buying them in stereo pairs. Compared to the big Klipschorn, the Heresy is smaller and more forgiving in regular rooms, but it still carries that signature speed and punch. Klipsch is famous for then came the Cornwall. In 1959, think of it as the sweet spot between the massive Klipschorn and the more compact Heresy. It's got richer bass and a beautiful, warm mid-range that makes vocals and acoustic instruments sound incredibly natural. A lot of longtime owners say it's their favorite for everyday listening because it's powerful without being overwhelming. Paul went bold again with the La Scala. This one was built tough enough to be used as a PA speaker for political rallies. It even hit the road with Winthrop Rockefeller. It's bigger, louder, and more commanding than the others. If the Klipschorn is a grand piano, the La Scala is a rock concert in your living room. Later, in 1971, they created the Bell La Scala as a more elegant tribute to Paul's wife. Same DNA, but with a sleeker look. W 1985, they released the Forte. This one was designed to be more living room friendly, slimmer cabinets, easier to place, but still packed with that classic Klipsch energy. It quickly became a bestseller because it gave you big sound without taking over the entire room. What ties all these speakers together is that pure horn-loaded philosophy Paul obsessed over. Unlike a lot of modern speakers that need a ton of power to come alive, heritage models are ridiculously efficient. They play loud and dynamic even with modest amps. And they do it with lower distortion. That's why so many owners say the same thing. Once you hear them, other speakers start sounding flat and lifeless by comparison. These aren't trendy hi-fi toys that'll be forgotten in 5 years. They're built to last decades. I've talked to people still happily using their 30 and 40-year-old Cornwalls and La Scalas, saying they sound as alive today as the day they bought them. In a world full of disposable audio and constant reinvention, the Heritage line stands as something honest, consistent, and timeless. It's not chasing trends, it's staying true to what made Klipsch special from day one. And the best part, you can still walk into the factory in hope and get a brand new pair built by hand, just like they did back in Paul's time. That's the real magic of the Heritage series. The Heritage line isn't about chasing trends, it's about staying true to what Paul started big. Efficient, low distortion sound that respects the recording and respects the listener. And the best part, you can still buy them brand new, hand-built in that same town in Arkansas. In a world where everything feels disposable, Klipsch Heritage feels like something built to last a lifetime, maybe even longer. That's the real power of this lineup. It's not just audio gear. It's a piece of American audio history you can actually own and enjoy every single day. The Jubilee story where passion met promise. Now, here's where things get emotional, because even after Paul was gone, one last dream refused to die. This is the story of the Jubilee, and the promise that refused to be buried. Let's talk about the Klipschorn Jubilee. In 1986, a young engineer named Roy Delgado got a phone call that would change his life. Fresh out of the University of Texas, he was offered a job at Klipsch in Hope, Arkansas. He took it. What started as a simple engineering position turned into something much deeper. Roy didn't just work for Paul Klipsch. He became one of the very few people who truly understood the old man's vision. By the late 1990s, Paul was in his mid-90s, but his mind was still sharp as ever. He had one last big idea burning inside him. He wanted to take the legendary Klipschorn back to a two-way design. He told Roy, "I want to improve it." They worked on it together. After listening to several prototypes, Paul shook his head and said something powerful. "We can't call this the Klipschorn 2. It sounds too good. We'll call it the Jubilee." That name wasn't marketing talk. It was personal. It marked a celebration of everything they had built. Paul Klipsch passed away in 2002 at the age of 98. The company was deep in the home theater boom at the time, and the Jubilee project quietly got put on the shelf. A lot of people thought that dream had died with Paul, but the fans refused to let it go. On the Klipsch forum, people kept asking about the Jubilee. Roy, who had been quietly keeping the project alive in his heart, started engaging with the community. Then something beautiful happened. The annual pilgrimage every year, die-hard Klipsch fans from all over the country, and eventually the world make the trip to Hope, Arkansas. They visit the museum, tour the factory, and listen to music together. It's part family reunion, part audio pilgrimage. During one of those pilgrimages, Roy decided to bring out a working prototype of the Jubilee. The reaction was electric. One fan from Tennessee stood up after the demo and said, "I have Klipschorns at home and I love them, but these sound better. How do I get a pair?" Another guy behind him immediately raised his hand and said the same thing. Word spread like wildfire on the forum. People were begging for it. What happened next is pure legend. Roy and the team started building a limited number of Jubilees by hand, the famous Underground Jubilee. Over 100 pairs were made in that first run. These weren't official production models. They were built with passion and sold quietly to fans who understood what they represented. Those speakers started showing up in homes across America and then made their way to Europe, Germany, England, Italy, you name it. People would invite friends over for listening sessions, and the orders kept coming. The demand from the community became impossible to ignore. Roy Delgado had made a quiet promise to Paul before he passed to finish what they started. Years later, with the support of the fans and the company, that promise was finally kept. The Klipschorn Jubilee officially entered production as part of the 75th anniversary celebration. When I think about this story, it hits me hard. This wasn't just about building a better speaker. It was about loyalty. It was about a young engineer refusing to let his mentor's final dream die. It was about a community of fans who cared so much they basically willed the speaker into existence. Roy once said in an interview that he didn't want to let Mr. Klipsch down. That honesty, that respect, that love for the craft. That's what makes the Jubilee so special. It's more than a flagship speaker. It's living proof that real passion and real community can overcome time, corporate changes, and even death. This is why Klipsch is different. Other brands release products. Klipsch builds legacies, and the Jubilee stands today as the ultimate expression of that legacy, the final chapter Paul started, and Roy, along with the fan, refused to leave unfinished. That's powerful stuff. Men, really powerful. Why Klipsch is different. The no drama legacy. Let me tell you what really sets Klipsch apart from every other speaker brand out there. In this industry, drama is everywhere. You see, companies get sold, gutted, moved overseas, and completely lose their soul. Founders get pushed out, traditions get thrown away for quarterly profits, and fans end up mourning the brand they once loved. I've watched it happen too many times. But Klipsch, they're the rare exception, the no-drama brand. Paul sold the company in 1989 to his cousins Fred and Judy Klipsch when he was 85 years old. Manufacturing stayed right there in Hope, Arkansas, even after bigger acquisitions later on, first by Audiophile. Then other groups, the heart of the company, never left its roots. They kept building the Heritage line by hand in the same town where Paul started it all in 1946. That kind of consistency is almost unheard of. While other brands chase trends, cut corners, or completely reinvent themselves every few years, Klipsch stayed true. They expanded into pro media computer speakers, a home theater, and even headphones. But they never abandoned the core. The Heritage speakers Klipschorn, La Scala, Cornwall, Heresy are still made with the same philosophy Paul believed in: high efficiency, low distortion, and that signature horn sound that hits you in the soul. What really moves me is the people. You've got employees who've been at the factory for 25 centuries, even 47 years. These aren't just workers, they're keepers of the flame. When you talk to them, you hear the pride in their voices. They're not just building boxes. They're continuing Paul's legacy every single day. And then there are the fans, real, die-hard fans who make the annual pilgrimage to Hope, Arkansas. They come from all over the country, some even from overseas, to tour the factory, visit the museum, listen to music together, and pay respect to the man who started it all. It's not a corporate event. It feels more like a family reunion for people who share the same obsession. What really hits me about the Heritage line is how these speakers become part of people's actual lives, not just sitting in the corner collecting dust. I've spent a lot of time reading stories on the Klipsch forums and Reddit, and they never get old. One guy told me he's passing his Klipschorns down to his son next year. He bought them in the late 90s. And now they're going to be the centerpiece of his kid's first serious listening room. That's the kind of thing that makes you smile. Another man shared that his 1,987 Heresy 2s are still his daily drivers, almost 40 years later. He said he's moved houses 4 times, gone through 2 different marriages. And those speakers have been with him through all of it. They've outlasted relationships. He joked, but they still sound as lively as the day I brought them home. I remember one story about a pair of La Scalas that survived 3 different houses and 2 divorces. The owner laughed and said, the speakers stayed, the wives left, but in a more serious tone, he admitted that every time life got hard, putting on a good record through those La Scalas was his therapy. They became more than audio equipment. They were old friends that never let him down. You hear these stories over and over. People talk about how their Cornwalls have been in the family for 30-plus years. One father bought a pair when his daughter was born. Now she's in college and wants to take them with her when she gets her own place. Another guy said his Forte pair has been through countless parties, late-night jazz sessions, and even survived a basement flood. He dried them out, replaced the surrounds, and they're still going strong. That's the difference with Klipsch Heritage. These aren't disposable hi-fi toys that you upgrade every few years when something newer comes out. They become heirlooms. They carry memories. They're the soundtrack to marriages, breakups, new homes, kids growing up, and quiet nights when you just need the music to feel alive. In an industry that loves to push the next best thing, Klipsch reminds us that some things are built to last not just physically, but emotionally. These speakers don't just play music, they become part of your story. And that, more than anything, is why they're so special. So here's my message to whoever owns Klipsch today. Don't mess with this legacy. Don't water down the heritage line. Don't move production overseas. Don't chase cheap trends at the expense of what made this brand special. Because what Klipsch has is incredibly rare in audio authenticity, consistency, and real emotional connection with its people. In an industry full of reinventions, buyouts, and broken promises, Klipsch stands as proof that you can grow, evolve, and still stay true to where you came from. That's why no other brand has been able to copy them. It's not just the technology. It's the story, it's the place, it's the people, and it's the quiet promise that some things are still worth protecting. That's the real truth about Klipsch. And that's why, for so many of us, these speakers aren't just audio equipment. They're part of the family. Klipsch isn't just a speaker company. It's a story about fate, loyalty, and real passion from a tin shed in Hope, Arkansas, to legends like Roy Delgado keeping promises, and fans crazy enough to make the pilgrimage, no matter if you love Heresy, Cornwall, La Scala, or Jubilee. When the passion is real, the legacy lives on loud and clear. So tell me down in the comments, have you owned Klipsch? What's your favorite model? Drop your stories. I read every one. Thanks for watching Legendary Audio. If you enjoyed this, hit like, share it with your audio friends, and subscribe for more. This is Ray Cole signing off. Keep the music alive. Folks, see you in the next one.